Hi there, my name is Elizabeth Lovelady, and I just finished directing Constellations by Nick Payne as part of my MFA experience at the Lear Academy. With the COVID-19 pandemic raging, no one knows when or if things in the theater industry will ever go back to normal. The only reason we were able to go ahead with this production was because we were doing it for the learning experience, and audiences seeing it wasn't vital. We opened to an enthusiastic audience of 6 on the 30th of September, 2020. With Constellations now in my rearview mirror, I found myself wanting to chronicle our adventure as a way of celebrating the hard work we put into this production that so few people saw, and to explore what we learned from making a play during a global health crisis. The process required full buy-in from everyone involved. We wore masks at all times with the exception of actors during performances. Design and production meetings were exclusively held online, and throughout the rehearsal process and performances, everyone, on stage and off, maintained social distance of 2 meters. At its heart, Constellations is a love story between a beekeeper named Roland, played in our production by Rowan Finken, and a cosmologist named Marianne, played by Emma Rose Creaner. On a higher level, the play is about multiple universe theory. The character of Marianne describes it this way. In the quantum multiverse, every choice, every decision you've ever and never made exists in an unimaginably vast ensemble of parallel universes. Our set needed to represent various locations across many different universes, so designer Fajardo created a celestial design with large flats in the shapes of major constellations, 2 of which rotated around central pivot points to reveal structures that the actors could sit on. Every surface was sanitized between each rehearsal and performance. Sound designer Stapleton composed original music and created a distinctive sound effect that helps us represent the rapid shifts between universes. Since the set pieces were totally representational, our lighting designer Hanley was tasked with the job of making sure the way the light fell on the actors looked like the locations where the scenes took place, while also ensuring that each universe looked ever so slightly different from the one before. Caroline O'Connor's costume design featured base costumes for the actors that could work across the various universes, with additions and subtractions to make each sequence distinct. Our rehearsal room was largely closed to visitors. Designers based most of their decisions on what they learned from watching the live feed camera we would fire up whenever we were doing a run. Unfortunately, depth perception suffered greatly in translation, making it difficult for them to evaluate exactly where the actors were on the stage and to get a clear idea of the sightlines of the audience. Lauda was not only kept from the rehearsal room, but COVID also prevented her from popping in on the scene shop to see the progress of the build. While it all came together beautifully in the end, not being able to casually check in on everything added additional stress. A huge and unexpected benefit that several of my collaborators mentioned was an abundance of one particular resource we never seem to have enough of: time. Our industry often demands that designers split their time between many different projects, but with work and social lives brought to a relative standstill by the pandemic, the artists involved in Constellations had significantly more time and energy to dedicate to their work. Michael mentioned that he found it to be hugely beneficial to focus exclusively on one production rather than having to switch gears between various projects. By and large, folks were happy to be having most of our production meetings take place on Zoom. It saved everyone time and money commuting, and it made scheduling much easier. We also found that virtual meetings were often more focused, with clear objectives set out beforehand and a definitive start and end time. While this was mostly a positive, what we did miss out on was the long, rambling discussions that might take place in early design meetings. Conversations where things might go off topic, but in the end, they helped to get everyone on the same page. The first time that we all met in person was when we arrived at the theater for tech. There was a great deal of commentary over how people were actually shorter or taller than was expected. Across the board, we were all surprised at how painless the tech process was. I think that we expected the protocols to add additional stress, but often they had the opposite effect. We all came in a lot more prepared than we might typically, both because we had more time available during pre-production and because the restrictions demanded that we make major decisions much earlier in the process. Caroline mentioned that in a typical show, she would buy many different garments and gradually narrow down the options. However, COVID-related delays in shipping and changes in retail return policies meant that she had to make firm decisions on what each actor would wear long before we got to tech. Once fittings were complete, the actors were the only people allowed to touch their individual costumes. If the garment needed to pass to someone else's hands, it had to be steam cleaned in between. This meant that no quick fixes could be done on the fly. We also prioritized ventilation. So windows were kept open whenever possible, and every 90 minutes, everyone was required to leave the room for an air break. Theoretically, everyone taking a break every 90 minutes sounds like a great idea, but in actuality, having to come to a complete stop on whatever you're doing to get up and leave the room for every hour and a half was frustrating. But once we got into the habit, we found that it was beneficial to everyone's process. Knowing we had a limited amount of time available to us before we had to stop everything forced everyone to be deliberate in how they used the time we had. Bloom mentioned that taking a break at regular intervals also helped her to organize her thoughts and plan how she would use the next 90 minutes. I think the breaks also helped to create a sense of camaraderie amongst the cast and designers. Often these two groups largely function independent from one another, with the actors occupying the space on stage and the designers in the house behind glowing laptop screens. The time we all spent outside together on air breaks helped everyone to get to know one another and made us feel like we were all part of one cohesive team. Taking productions online, or in our case, performing for very few people, has forced many of us in the industry to consider a bigger question. What is theater? And what is it for? What makes it distinct? Is a live stream of a stage production a close enough approximation of what it would be like to see the play in person? Can you call a Zoom reading of a play theater? I've had this conversation many times over in the past few months, and I've yet to hear anyone say enthusiastically and unequivocally that the work being made online counts as live theater. People in a theater, on stage, and in the audience have a great deal of freedom, and what they do with that freedom makes an impact on everyone else in the room. It's unpredictable, and that's part of what makes it so exciting and so difficult to replicate. However, despite my misgivings, I applaud everyone who's trying to make theater work online, or for small audiences, or outdoors, or in other innovative ways I haven't heard of yet. Perhaps we will look back on this period as a moment of great innovation, when lines between art forms began to blur and what emerged was so much more exciting than what we had before. Directing Constellations in the midst of a pandemic was a bizarre but beautiful experience. And now that I'm on the other side, I have every hope that we will emerge from this period with a greater understanding of the value of coming together to tell stories and share in a collective emotional experience.